Since the beginning of time, humans have told stories, from ancient carvings in caves to Greek mythologies, holy scriptures, and even legends that have passed down from generation to generation. Storytelling has been a core part of every single culture we know. We've used stories to explain the world, to connect with each other, and to preserve our histories. And today, the same tradition continues, whether it's in movies, books, or even stories we tell over our dinner tables. Think about the last time someone told you a story that was so vivid, so clear, it stayed with you for years. Why did that story stick? What is it about it that made it stay for a long time, and why others fade away? What truly makes a great storyteller? Is it their voice, their words, or something deeper than that? And most importantly, how do we preserve our stories? The ones that shaped us, the ones that were passed down from our parents, that defined our childhood, and the ones that are being created by our own children today. In this video, I want to talk to you about three things. What makes a story memorable? You get the point. Two is, what are the qualities of a good storyteller? And then finally, why is it so important to preserve stories? What is the power of preserving stories? Hi friends, my name is Mohammed and I'm a writer, and on this channel we build writing and reading habits to make the most of our time and better understand the world, especially for busy people. Let's start with what makes a story memorable. And I think it has to have three things, although there are other things that we can add on, but the main three are: it has to have an emotional connection, it has to be relatable, and have vivid details. But when it comes to stories, things that touch us emotionally are things that makes it last a long time, because there is this weird connection between how we feel and how we remember things. As for emotional connection, it goes without saying that we connect with stories that makes us cry, laugh, sad, whatever that emotional impulse is, we just remember it better. Especially when it comes to movies. We remember not the details of the movies and the characters, sometimes we even forget the character's name, but when it comes to how we felt at the end of the movie is the thing that sticks with us the most. And what immediately connects to this emotional experience is relatability. We do remember stories that we feel related to. I think this is why I fall in love, or I love every book or every movie that talks about or tells about the story of a character that it's stuck between two worlds. One they feel related to and one they struggle to feel part of. This is because of my immigration experience, and if it is a story or a book about migration, then I just connect, remember, love it even more. What immediately connects to this emotional experience is relatability. If we relate to the story, if the story tells of an experience that we've already had before or something that hits home for us, then we remember it even more. I think this is why I both love, remember, and always recommend books that are about migration, because I am an immigrant. I traveled from Yemen to the United States when I was 13, so I know what the challenges of learning a new language, of being dropped off to a new culture that you need to adapt to, of feeling like you're home but you're not really home, and in some moments people make you feel like you're not part of this new sphere or new world that you are in. So I love books like Exit West by Mohsin Hamad or Gravel Hearts by Abdul Razak Gurna, because they talks about migration experience in very different ways, but then they still feel like my experience and my travel to the United States. And the last part of making a story memorable is vivid details or specificity. We do not connect, or we do not remember things that are general. I felt sad that day. You do not remember a story with a sentence like that, whether you are writing it or telling it, but you remember it when it's very, very specific. For example, and this is somewhat of a cliche, but I'm just trying to drive an example, and instead of saying it's sad, saying something after whatever happened, I felt the world closing in on me and I felt suffocating. This is much better than just using I'm sad or I'm happy, because it makes you see what the effect or impact of the emotion, and instead of just describing it. Recently I've been reading a short story collection by Muhammad Abdul Wali, who is a Yemeni author. He wrote in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and there is this part in one of the stories that he writes of a merchant, a grocery owner, a deli owner, if you want to use modern terms, who is in Ethiopia. And in one of the stories, the author talks about this character who's standing in the middle of his store, a grocery, shack, whatever you want to call it, and it is so small. He says that he can feel or he can smell the different products that he's selling, the cheese, the cooked or boiled eggs that he also sells, and just that sensory details with the closeness or the smallness of the store makes me remember that story even after reading it for weeks. So when we want to tell a story or write one, then we have to think about what emotional connection does the story have with the audience that we are telling it to. How do we make it relatable to the audience that we are telling it to? So next time we want to tell a story, whether it's in a job interview or a presentation or even at a family dinner, and we want to test this method, is making sure that it has an emotional, brings forth an emotion in people, whether it's sad, mad, or whatever the emotion is, and also make it relatable. If I'm telling a story to my family, then I'm using words, I'm using experiences, I'm using gestures that relates to them and their, whether it's language, culture, or background, versus when I'm telling it to my friends or my coworkers, then I'm using very different words. And then regardless who we tell it to, regardless who's listening or reading, then we make sure that we are telling very, very specific details. Now, what are the qualities of a good storyteller and how we become one? And I think at the very, very top of the best quality storytellers that I have listened to, heard, even been in rooms with during my MFA program, my creative writing program, is that they are authentic. They're not faking it till you're making it. They are speaking from their heart. They're speaking about stories that connect with them at the very personal, emotional level, and they're not just, copying someone else. And I think the price of authenticity is vulnerability. If you are vulnerable and you are willing to expose your inner world to people, then it is an invitation for them to wear your shoes, and therefore they will be able to see that you are just speaking your heart. And I remember this very particular time. Previously, I used to work with school principals a lot, so I will go in, give them presentations about, strategies and sort of big picture things to do for them to connect with their community. So I go to this district and I'm standing before 20 or 30 principals, and I'm supposed to convince them or tell them about a presentation of why is it important to connect with their communities. And I remember the only way for me to convince them is not by giving them data from why is it important that if you connect with a child's parents, their grades will go up, but is to tell them a story. So I told them this story. Growing up, my mom was very, very keen on education, and every day I would come back home and she will tell me, do your homework. And this went on for years, and I think I was about 5th or 6th grade when the school gave me a packet or some sort of form for my mom to fill out. And so I go home and I have a pen and I give it to her and I tell her, fill this out, my teacher or my principal needs it. And then instead of filling it out, my mom calls my older sister and asks her to fill it out. And it was on that day when I found out my mom didn't even go to school when she was younger. She didn't know how to read or write. Still, I was always on the honor roll. I was a A+ student, and I did all the things when I was in Yemen and when I moved to the United States. And this, I told the principals, is what proves that when families, regardless of whether you speak their language or you are from their cultural background or not, but if you connect with them, if you help them connect with their children and hold their children accountable, or even connect with their children at the educational level and not, have the school as a place where they can drop them off, then students will do better. I told that story, people loved it. Afterwards, none of them came after me and told me how great the presentation is, or how great the colors of the PowerPoint, or the statistics that I shared, or the experiences, the pictures of our work that we have done in the past. Everybody came, or a lot of people came and told me what a great story it was that I told in the very beginning. And I think it's because it was authentic, it was my story, and I was vulnerable, and I wasn't scared that people will judge me, and I was willing to put myself out there so that people can wear my shoes and see life, or see the concepts that I was trying to explain from my perspective. The second thing that makes a great storyteller, and this is both in writing stories and just storytelling in public, is that you have to know, or you have to have an emotional meter for pacing and rhythm. Pacing and rhythm is knowing in the story where you can rush through which part and where you have to take your time so that the listener, reader can connect with the story. I want to give you an example. It's not a perfect example, but it will illustrate the point that I'm trying to make here. After having something that happens to you over the weekend, you get to work or you meet your friends during the week and you want to tell a story. Sometimes we tell this particular story in this way. You would not believe what happened to me over the weekend. I was backing off my parking garage and behold, a bike hit me. It hit my bumper. I didn't even see it. My kid was crying and it was traumatic. Now, this is one way to tell that story. Another way to tell that story is in this way. And I feel like at this point I'm getting very technical and very nerdy about storytelling, but just see the difference when you build pace and rhythm to the story, when you stretch the parts that needs to be stretched and you condense the parts that need to be condensed. On Saturday, my family and I decided to go apple picking. The weather was very nice, the sky was clear and it was blue and it wasn't no sign of rain. It was just the perfect fall day. As I was backing up my car from the garage, everyone was excited, but my daughter has this habit. She's been calling me Baba every time she's on the car to show me a new color dress that she has or point me to the sky or a bird, and it's been just a little bit annoying. So she's in the car, I'm backing out, and she's calling me Baba, 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 and I'm just ignoring her because I'm trying to see who is behind me. As I was backing up, her voice was getting louder. I was looking both ways and I was telling her, just give me a moment, wait, and she was not listening. Her voice got louder and louder, so I finally turned around and asked her, what is it that you want? And from the corner of my eyes, I saw a bike coming into the sidewalk, and I pressed brake, but it was too late. He was already in the sidewalk and I hit him and he fell down on the floor. Now, I made that story up, not the best story, but it explains, or it shows you, if you stretch the parts that actually matter, if you build up the story in a way where you can increase the tension so that the result or the thing that the people expect to happen or wait for it to happen come crashing into their like mental imagery, then it becomes a story that is successful and people do remember, and you are, you know, a proved or a storyteller. Now, the last thing that a lot of good storytellers have is that they have an emotional awareness while they are telling the story or while they are writing the story. They can predict what the audience is experiencing while they're telling the story. When it comes to books, this is done very, very well by Jamaica Kincaid. It's a book called The Small Place or A Small Place, and it's in second person, and I think this is what makes it so powerful, and this is what gives her the, I mean, she's just a good writer, but gives her the ability to predict what the person or the reader is experiencing, and she voices it in the text. So she will say, I know that you are, because it's in the second person. And I think she does that very well. So if you want to see an example of how is that done in the writing, then read that book. But when it comes to telling stories to, you know, an audience or over the dinner table, then using things like silences, and this is so good when you are watching comedians. They just know when to use silence effectively. They will say a line, they will pause, people will be forced sometimes to laugh, and they will let it ride that laugh for a little bit, and then they will continue the story. Dave Chappelle is a master at this. Watch any of his specials and just notice how he uses his silences when he is telling a story, and record them, and just take notice of how emotionally aware he is of the audience and what they're experiencing, and you know how he uses tools like the word but or silences. But what is the power of preserving all these stories, telling stories, or even remembering them and telling them to our children? I think for me, especially coming from someone who has lived in another place and now has a child in the United States, there are stories of how I grew up, stories that I was told when I was a child during electric outages that I can't wait to tell my kids, because I think it will show them where I came from, and it will build a connection for them that they are part of this lineage or part of this bigger world that's not limited by, you know, the city that they live in or the city that they were born in. If you know anything about Yemen, then you know is a society that's built on tribes. I'm part of a tribe, and anyone who is from Yemen is part of a family that's part of a bigger tribe. It's not like it's a government system or anything, but it's a societal tradition that have passed down from generation to the next. And I asked when I was, I think in high school, my grandfather, how did our tribe get formed? Because I think at some point, my tribe name is Zaid. How did we form? Who is this guy Zaid? And he told me the legend is this man Zaid traveled from the north all the way to central Yemen because he was running away from the Imamites, which at the time who were governing Yemen, and they were after him because they wanted to put him in jail from some sort of crime. And he got to central Yemen. He was hiding there for a long time. He married someone, and then from that marriage, family became bigger, became multiple families, became a tribe. Now for me, that story is important because it sort of tells me the origin story of my family and of my tribe. And the way we preserve these stories is not only by listening and passing it down to the next generation. There are so many tools today that we can take advantage of, from journaling, taking videos of us telling stories. What I've been doing recently for the past few years is that every time my mother-in-law or my mom or my grandmother is telling a story, and because at this point I know when they're about to tell a story, I'll just take out my phone and voice record them telling that story. It was awkward in the very beginning. I was trying to avoid it, but now when I listen to the recordings of those moments, I am so glad that I recorded them, because they live somewhere. They have that sort of effect when you look at a picture of yourself when you were a little kid and you look at yourself now and you see the growth that you have made, or like how vintage this thing is. And the way we do this is not by just being passive and waiting for the storytelling moment to happen between us and the people that we want to hear their stories from, or even us to wait for someone to ask us. For example, if you have a grandfather, or you visit your mom or your dad or whatever the case might be, and you want to hear a story that you remember since you were a child, ask them about it. Tell them what did it feel like to be born in the country that they were born in, or what did it feel like when they arrived to the United States, or whatever the case might be. And I promise you, no matter how many times you ask them, even to retell the same story that they have told for 100th time, we just don't get enough of retelling the story, because our story, because it reaffirms who we are, and it shows us the transformation that we have made from when we were to who we are. This is the story of my mother-in-law when she first arrived at the United States. She has told it to me maybe, I don't know, 15 times, and I can ask her any day of the week, can you tell me what it felt like when you first arrived here? And she will retell that same story like she's telling it for the first time. And for me, the only regret that I have is that I didn't have a strong relationship with my grandfather, and he came here in the 70s. I lived in Yemen for a long time. He would just visit for the summer, and we did not have that connection, and I also didn't have the the storytelling awareness that I have now. And this is something that I regret, not sitting down with him, not asking him, not being able to have a relationship where I can just listen to him tell stories. I just didn't have it. And if you are privileged to have a grandfather or a grandmother who is still alive and they can tell you stories, then take advantage of it, because we're all here and one day we will not be. Well, I hope by now you feel a sense of urgency to be telling stories, preserve stories in your life, and asking people in your life about, their own stories. And if you watched this video this far, then you will probably enjoy my video on the habit that changed my life, which is also a habit that will help you preserve your stories. Watch here, and in the meantime, thank you for watching, and keep telling and writing stories.